Welcome to Ask an Atheist, a weekly educational call-in program dedicated to atheism, skeptical inquiry, and the separation of church and state. My name is Casey Dorn, and with me, my co-host today, Scott Leopold. Thanks for joining me, sir.
Great to be here.
It's been a long time in the running, so I'm really glad to get to sit next to you and finally hash this bit out.
We're gonna have a lot of fun.
But before we get on, we're going to try to get on quickly with the topic because it's something that we're both going to love. You have some announcements about SCAN and our predicament.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the announcement is that the end of SCAN is coming next year. We're going to be making some changes, but tomorrow, Monday, the 22nd of November, the Seattle City Council will actually formally decide. And we're pretty convinced that they're going to decide to defund SCAN starting December 31st. So beginning January 1st, SCANtv, that's cable channel 77 here in the Pacific Northwest, will be going dark. But we're planning to continue Ask an Atheist, and we've got some really great, exciting plans. Can't share the details with you yet, but there's going to be a benefit show at the Tacoma Comedy Club, and that's tacomacomedyclub.com, Thursday, December 9th. You can get more details at the www.askanatheist.tv website for exact time, location. But we want you to know that Ask an Atheist is very popular, and we're going to be continuing this probably in a more professional format, possibly a commercial format professionally.
Okay. Let's see. The next thing we might want to get to is, well, we've got news, but the news is all centered around your topic, and so why don't we just go forward and start talking about it?
Let's jump into the news.
So the first bit here, and this is from Americans United, a group of Christian fundamentalist secondary schools in California has failed in its legal battle to force public universities to grant credit for academically questionable courses. The U.S. Supreme Court, without comment, declined the case last month. The court's inaction leaves in place a federal appellate decision against the religious schools. Institutions of higher learning in the University of California system require that the students take certain high school courses to be admitted. Officials in the system said that some of the courses offered by Christian schools covering history, science, English, not math, I would assume, did not measure up and refused to recognize them. The Christian schools sued, claiming discrimination. In court, the lawyers for the Christian academies insisted that they offer, quote, standard course content, unquote, but add, quote, a religious viewpoint in each subject. This is reported by the San Francisco Chronicle. And so this is later on it says, the English classes students did not often read novels or plays, but relied on an anthology of quote, Christian classics that reflected fundamentalist dogma. So this is a fantastic instance of where the court works the way it should if there's a publicly funded institution like the UC system, which comes out of people's taxes, for us not to run an equivalence between the history course that you would have had and the history course that is packed with a lot of very pro religious dogma literature and slanted viewpoints that people shouldn't be represented as a secular society.
Yeah, the conflict of interest is always balancing private interest versus religious. And here's another example of where you have religious groups, it's always Christians, it's never any other group, trying to push their religious agenda into the education system. This goes right back to the Kitzmiller versus Dover Board of Education issue with the intelligent design. They're not going to give up, and this is another example of how they're always going to be pushing the religious agenda into our public school system. It's not going away.
Right. So if you want to talk about this, and I'm sure a lot of you do, our number is here to call in. You can talk to us. It's 206-421-5856.
5658.
Excuse me, 5658. We'll have that number up as soon as we possibly can. But this is obviously our favorite pet topic, and we love to hash this out. But this is definitely a story where the system does what it should do. The system should work to make sure that we aren't directly funding someone's religious particular bent and trying to make that equivalent with secular sources. This is a victory for us.
It is, and it's another example of the system of checks and balances in place between government and religious organizations, religious forces out there that would like to dominate politics, education, and so on. I think the first time I ever encountered the concept of a conflict of interest, remember the Planet of the Apes. There was Dr. Zaius, who was both the defender of the faith and Minister of Science. What a great introduction. That was back in high school, but that's a great one. Now that was the good. Here's the bad. Moving right through this. The First Circuit Court rules in favor of godly pledge. This is from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So we see this as bad news. The United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit on Friday issued a ruling against the Freedom from Religion Foundation's challenge of a New Hampshire statute requiring daily recitation of the godly Pledge of Allegiance. The federal challenge, was brought by attorney Michael Newdow on behalf of Freedom from Religion Foundation and New Hampshire Freedom from Religion Foundation members with school-age children in November of 2007. The lawsuit challenged a 2002 law requiring recitation of the pledge and requiring that those who do not participate, quote, be required to respect the rights of those peoples electing to participate. The record shows that the law was intended to further the policy of teaching our country's history to the elementary and secondary pupils of the state, unquote. The history of the pledge shows that it was secular from its 1892 inception until religious lobbies tampered with it in 1954, said the foundation co-president Annie Laurie Gaylor. The American Religious Identification Survey 2008 showed that the Northeast region is the least religious area, with 22% identifying as non-religious. New Hampshire is the least non-religious state, with a whopping 29% identifying as non-religious. Yeah.
That's shocking.
Even the American Religious Identification Survey in 2001 showed that 13% of the adult population was non-religious. So it's unfortunate that they've gone this route, because if you can say, one nation under God, what's the difference between that and one nation under Allah? Whose word do we get to use? And why does under God have to be in there? This is a 1954 inception.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, in the pledge, is not the God, isn't that the word capitalized? I think it is. I mean, if we were to see what it was officially written, the pledge itself written out, I think the God is capitalized, which we're not talking about lowercase g God, like, gods, like multiple gods. An uppercase G God, to me, signifies that it's the monotheistic God, the one God necessarily.
If anybody knows how to pronounce the word God with a lowercase as opposed to pronouncing it with an uppercase, I'd like to know. That would be really useful. Maybe that would have helped the court decide this case.
I was going to say, we have a resident linguist, Becky. She'd probably be able to tell us. There's probably a very subtle palate difference between the capital G and the lower G.
Yeah, it might be an alveolar, it might be a fricative.
We're splitting hairs here.
Yeah.
No, but what I do find that interesting is that the parts of the Constitution is, and I'm blanking at this moment, is that that it exists to protect the minority from the majority.
It does.
This is the equal. What is it called? The equal protection clause, essentially. It's to say that just because someone might be trapped in a political, racial, ethnic, or ideological minority, that they still have equal protection underneath the law. That's also something that's in our Constitution. And even though, we're 13%, let's just say non-believers, explicitly a 13% of the country, that still shouldn't matter. We should not be subjected to the religious will of the rest of the majority simply because we're the minority.
Yeah, the tyranny of the majority.
Exactly.
And like it says here, it shouldn't be okay for the government or for the court to exclude nearly a third of the state's population in a daily school ritual that turns non-believers into political outsiders. I mean, it's basically another example of the tyranny of the majority. People shouldn't be required to do this. I was just listening, it's totally off topic, but I was just listening to John Hodgman. Do you know him? He's the resident expert on The Daily Show. Oh, yeah. He's that geeky looking guy. He plays the Mac on the commercials. Oh, yeah, That's John Hodgman. He has this new bit where he does this Judge John Hodgman, and so it's like the People's Court, except for that the topics brought up to him, and it's just a podcast, are things like, the one I was listening to was is a machine gun a robot? So, things that don't, these aren't questions that really need to be answered, but they're hilarious. And they make each of the people sign in, and they say,
to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and he says, "So help me God," or whatever. I just thought that should be the way we should do it in our courts. So I should mention, if you want to call in and talk to us, it's area code 206-421-5658. I got that right. Haha. And then this is Ask an Atheist. I think we're having a little technical difficulties, so we'll just say it again. Ask an Atheist, which we are. And our topic today is separation of church and state. So let's do the last bit here.
Yes, that was the good and the ugly. Yeah. Now, or the good and the bad. You get to do the ugly. So I'll get the ugly.
So a federal judge blocked Oklahoma officials Monday from implementing a voter-approved referendum. This is a voter-approved referendum that singles out Islamic religious law, or Sharia, as a threat to the state. Chief Judge Vicky Miles LaGrange, yada, 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 set a November 22nd hearing to consider whether the Save Our State Amendment violates the U.S. Constitution. Until then, she issued a temporary restraining order preventing the state election board from certifying state question passed by 70% on November 70%. So essentially, the measure directs the state courts to ignore, quote, legal precepts of other nations or cultures, end quote, and specifically forbids consideration of, quote, international law or Sharia law, unquote. I actually don't know why they decided to put international law in there.
Talk about a red herring.
It does. A Muslim activist in Oklahoma City, Munir Awad, filed a suit last week alleging that the major violated the First Amendment, which forbids the government from promoting an establishment of religion or interfering with the free exercise thereof. And really, what comes out here is this is institutionalized discrimination. I think that from the most practical standpoint, it's not likely that even if you had a community, let's just say you have a hypothetical community, say somewhere in suburban Michigan, where we have the highest percentage of Muslim Americans. Let's say even if you were able to elect an entire city council and a mayor and their state and federal representatives that were all Muslim, there is no possible way at which they could enact what is essentially a strictly religious law in place of our secular legal system. Our country is specifically built to have a secular legal system, which can't be overrun because one particular sectarian group decides, well, no, we actually think we should be able to burn witches and make that secular law.
It solves a problem that doesn't exist. It's an imaginary problem in the first place, and it reflects just exactly how ignorant these people are. And it passed with what percent? It was
70%.
70% of the people of the state of Oklahoma passed this law. It's amazing. It also reminds me how, when people of religious faith feel violated, they sue for, the right to discriminate. They want to hire people of their faith to work in their churches or their faith-based initiatives, but they sue for the right to discriminate on that basis. Right. And yet they're the first people that will cry foul anytime the Supreme Court, or any other court for that matter, makes a ruling against them. If they really had true faith in their religious convictions, they wouldn't need the fiat of government to get behind them. Their faith would sustain them.
And I think that looking at this, the flip side, I always think that what happens if I always say this to people, is that you always put yourself on the opposite side. Let's say you are you're in any other town and small town in the United States, and just because there were a very large group of people who were able to vote in something that basically said, it is illegal to be a Christian within the borders of here. You can't display a crucifix on your back of your car. You can't have it displayed even on private property. You would hate those Christians would hate to have those restrictions. In fact, they would think that they was the most unfair laws they could have ever imagined. Because why would you ever make a law just discriminating against somebody's arbitrary characteristic about someone? Surely they make a choice. It's not. It's discrimination against a distinction of choice that they make about themselves. But no Christian that would never fly. They would want to go to the Supreme Court. They would say this is unfair. So they rarely do they ever want to take the flip side of this case and think about how fair it would be if they were on the other end. And that's precisely why separation of church and state. Yep. That's precisely why.
Absolutely. This gets back to the re-Christianization of American culture, the attempts to destroy, science and fact-based teaching of science in high schools.